surround us. So we pour it into a plant that represents life, and we too are life. So this time I'm going to ask you to call forth some names of those who have been stolen from us by police violence. Are there any names?
Aja Raquel. Aja Raquel.
Aja Raquel, say his name.
Kenny Watkins.
Kenny Watkins.
Rashario Mack.
Rashario Mack.
Quentin Thomas.
Quentin Thomas. Ashe.
Maybe you were right.
Daniel Hernandez. Kenneth French.
John Gordon.
John Horton. Ashe. Brother Africa. Ashe. The list is very long.
Waukesha Wilson. She asked for us to call Waukesha Wilson.
Waukesha Wilson. You know, the list is very long. We're going to learn about that list tonight. But there's also ancestors who are freedom fighters who have passed the baton to us and told us it is our duty to fight. So if you will, call forth those freedom fighters who give you strength to fight right now. John Lewis.
Marsha P. Johnson.
Marsha P. Johnson. Mama Harriet. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. James Baldwin.
Mama Ida B. Wells.
Mama Ida B. Wells.
Mary,
Mrs. Fannie Lou Hamer.
Mrs. Fannie Lou Hamer.
Mary Church Terrell.
Mary Church Terrell.
Ella Baker.
Ella Baker.
Toni Morrison.
Toni Morrison.
Josephine St. Pierre Ruffin.
Josephine St. Pierre.
Zora Neale Hurston.
Zora Neale Hurston. Marcus Garvey. Now I want you to hold in your breath one last name, the name that you come from, your ancestor, which brings you in this moment to do this work and call out white supremacy and police state violence. You have it?
Yep.
Now with a loud yell, let that name out. Ashe, Ashe, Ashe. You got it.
So welcome everybody. I want to thank Pastor James Thomas. We want to thank Sister Rebecca. We want to thank Pastor Eddie for opening us up in the correct energy, for summoning that spiritual energy into the room. And I also want to lift up how much it means to have each of you all here. What was funny is as I was walking in, somebody said, "Oh, that was you, Rebecca. Now, what is this?" So I love that you all saw the invitation to come. I want to thank Megan. Where's Megan? Probably hiding somewhere. Okay. Megan coordinated all the logistics.
All right, Megan.
I want to thank Philip for doing our tech. I don't know who else was on the setup crew, but thank you for everybody who helped with the setup. And I would want to thank especially our research team, which Tabitha Jones Jolivet, Dr. Tabitha Jones Jolivet. So here's why we're here. We realize that Jackie Lacey is not going to give us justice. Jackie Lacey hasn't prosecuted any of the police who killed is gone at least by November, right? We're generating that energy, and spirit continues to move. Spirit is what made her husband act a fool, right? Spirit is what made, he's going to be the nail in her coffin, right? However, we know that the entire way in which the criminal system of injustice, as Dr. Yusef Salam calls it, it's all a setup.
Right.
It's all a setup. So even when she's out, we're still not going to get justice. We're still not going to get prosecutions for all of our people. We may get a few more, right? But we're not going to bring everyone to justice. And even if they were all prosecuted, that's still not justice, right? That's still not justice. Justice would be the Daniel story. That's what justice would be, right? So we need to think about how do we call ourselves abolitionists, right? How do we not just chant down Babylon, although that's really important and it's a dope chant, right? Not just chant down Babylon, but I want us to think about those names that we called. When we called Mama Harriet Tubman, when we called Frederick Douglass, when we called Nat Turner, when we called Sojourner Truth, when they were talking about ending chattel slavery, that was much less of their emphasis than ushering in what? Freedom, right? It's really, what are we fighting for? What are we fighting for? And we often say, we keep us safe. We keep us safe. Yes? So what we're here to do is say that those who steal our lives are not going to have the freedom to walk in our communities without being shamed, without being held accountable. We're absolutely calling on the district attorney to prosecute killer cops, but because she won't, we're also saying that they are personas non grata. When you see Ryan Lee and Martin Robles, we should be able to say, no, you are not welcome in the Baldwin Hills Crenshaw Mall, right? When we see Tony McBride, she needs to feel it from us, and I mean this in a spiritual sense. Nobody say, you know what they be saying about BLM, right? I mean that there is a shaming that has to happen. There has to be a refusal to allow them to walk neighborhoods in peace without bearing the consequences of the lives that they've stolen. They've stolen lives, and until, in my tradition, there's a concept of atonement, right? Until they sufficiently atone for their sinful actions, until they atone and pay restitution for what they've done, until they come to the mother of Daniel Hernandez and the family of Anthony Vargas, and what other families do we have here? The mother of John Horton, and the family of Brendan Glenn, right? Until they come to the family of Brashario Mack and do everything they can to atone, right? To make it as right as they possibly can, they should suffer. And I mean suffer in the spiritual sense. Does that make sense to y'all? Nobody say I said, roll up on me. Now, we could roll up on their house sometime and protest, right? But I don't want y'all to think that we're talking about doing to them what was done to us, right? So I don't want you to think that's what we're saying. What we're saying is there has to be, anybody who's a parent knows, there have to be consequences for your actions. When you are a murderer, there have to be consequences for your actions, right? And so what we're here to do is to stand in the tradition of Mama Ida B. Wells, of Mary Church Terrell, of Josephine St. Pierre Ruffin, of all of the black club women. I don't know how many black women in this room are members of sororities like mine, Alpha Kappa Alpha sorority. I'm shouting it out. All right, Kim. I don't like taking that back. I'll ski-wee later. Right? But the tradition that black but to lift as we climb, right? To make sure that we pull our people up. It recognized the truth that we cannot be free when our people are enslaved, right? So we are standing on their shoulders. We are standing on their shoulders. And Ida B. Wells in 1895, which Dr. Jones Jolivet will come up and talk about, published something called the Red Record, which detailed the lynchings of the 19th century. And she continued to write and publish into the 20th century about the murders of our people. Not let those histories be untold. We are here to present to you our Red Record.
That's right.
The detailing of what has happened to our people at the hands of police. We are telling the police who killed our people's names. We're getting as many photos as we possibly can, and we're publishing them on a website called Prosecute Killer Cops. Black Lives Matter and from White People for Black Lives. This has been a painstaking process that's taken more than 2 years to get as much of this data as we can as possible, that it'll be available for everybody to see so that you know who to run from, that you know who to shame, that you know what to do, right? That we know that these folks don't get to kill us in the dark and never have it come to light. There will be consequences. There will be spiritual and societal and social consequences for stealing our lives. And so that's why we're here today. And in a minute, we'll show you the website. I want to invite up Dr. Tabitha Jones Jolivet to ground us in a little bit more history.
Thanks for bearing with us. While we're getting the microphone set, let's also acknowledge Kenneth French's family who's here with us today. Let us say his name. Kenneth French, say his name. Kenneth French, say his name. Kenneth French. Say his name. Kenneth French. Ashe. Just bear with us for a moment. And while we're here, let's also acknowledge our solidarity partners, our members who struggle with us from Build Power. They provided this amazing food. Can we thank them? Let's also acknowledge, thank you, we appreciate you, and we know that you are in this work, that this is your work as well as ours, and we're in it and struggle together. Let's also thank our partners here at Pollution Studios. They donated this space, and so when we gather and we pray and we acknowledge the ancestors and those for whom we struggle, when we come together, we do so because it is a sacred duty. And it is in the tradition of sacred duty that we today, as Black Lives Matter, launched a database, which we're calling Prosecute Killer Cops, a 21st century Red Record. I want to tell you about the Red Record. I want to tell you about the freedom fighter, Ida B. Wells, who risked her life, her reputation, who used her time and her energy to tabulate every single incident of lynching in these territories. At a time much like this one, when the height of white supremacist terrorism and the height of lynchings terrorized Black people and all who allied with them. It sounds a lot like right now, doesn't it? So we realize that while we look back back in history to mark this moment, and we turn to a courageous freedom fighter, an anti-lynching activist who you should know was enslaved as an African here. Upon gaining legal freedom, she went about the business much in the rebellion when she was enslaved, but also upon her legal freedom, she went about documenting the horrors of lynching, and she risked her life in doing so. The Red Record was a rigorously researched pamphlet. Our version of this is a website, but this was a pamphlet that she self-published, with 100 pages that she kept updating and republishing over and over again, because she wanted to draw close, particularly when those had been lynched, because she herself had lost dear friends and loved ones to lynching. She had lost her dear friends Thomas Moss, Calvin McDowell, and Henry Stewart, and I'm grateful to our research team historian, Dr. Kim McNair, for pointing this out to us. Because when she lost those closest to her in lynching, rather than running away, she went directly to the sites of those lynchings. She went directly to the families who were most impacted by the lynchings. And she listened to their eyewitness accounts of what had happened, and she documented every single one in this Red Record. She became, as many of us now know, one of the first investigative journalists that we've ever seen in the 20th century. And because of her research, we know that while there were a number of allegations which she detailed in the Red Record as to why people justified lynching black folks, what she found was that those particular allegations really masqueraded as actual repression to ensure that black people could not make any human progress. And she intervened to say, we deserve to live, we deserve to thrive. So she documented every single account. Because of this documentation, we know, and these are her words, tens of thousands were killed in cold blood and without the formality of a judicial trial. When I hear about this again, which we saw evidence of on this side of the Emancipation Proclamation being released, but also as it continued to grow and massify, we saw, for example, one of the longest red summers emerge in 2019. And it didn't end there. It continued to grow and to evolve. This vicious white supremacist terrorism continued to grow and evolve, terrorizing black people and black communities, because there was an attempt by not only vigilantes but by the state to repress the dignity of black folks and to cut our lives short, to ensure premature black death, which is what we are dealing with right now. And I know that those of us who are gathered know this. In Los Angeles County, law enforcement are essentially the ones who terrorize and occupy and ensure that there is premature black death now. State-sponsored violence. There have been 618 murders by law enforcement in Los Angeles County since Jackie Lacey took office. And so this database documents every single one. We document them in the spirit of Ida B. Wells, who says, and I think this is a sacred vocation for all of us, the way that you right wrongs is you turn the light of truth upon them. The way that you right wrongs is you turn the light of truth upon them, so that when we gather like we are now with families, we listen to their truth. We listen to the truth, because we know that the truth has been distorted to protect those who are in power. Well, we say we have power.
That's right.
We have power. We have the same power that Ida B. Wells used. To use the power of our stories to tell the truth to power, so that we can ensure that these wrongs are made right. So in just a moment, I'm going to invite Mr. Quintus Moore, the father of Rashario Mack. His entire family is here today to come and tell story and to tell you why this is so important to them as a family. Because we will not allow people to continue to criminalize and terrorize and malign our people without fighting back and without shining the light of truth upon it. So I want to thank you for being here. Please help me welcome Mr. Prince.
Thank you. I remember what was it, last year or the year before last, when we all hopped on big buses and all went to Sacramento to fight for the Accountability Act, the Accountability Bill, AB 392. And I remember, and it stood out to me, that they spoke on the pros about how these cops are murdering us and getting away with it with no consequences. And the con, the best that they could come up with, one of the officers for the con, who was against the bill, said that if we pass this bill, the accountability bill, we'll have a good hard time getting new recruits. And that stuck out with me ever since he said that. But this is a way to hold these officers accountable. The red record, put their asses on blast. So you can look up, because what they do, when they do dirt, just like the pedophile priests in the Catholic Church, they send them from one parent to the next. They do the same thing with these officers. One of the officers, was either Brian Lee or Martin Roberts is the ones who murdered our son. And they said one of them did so much dirt in the valley, they sent him to South Central, to Southwest, so he could do some more dirt. The guy who killed George Floyd, they said he had 18 infractions, including 3 other murders. The guy who killed Kenneth Ross Jr. killed 4 other people before he killed Kenneth Ross. These people just keep getting away with murder, and that's the reason they keep doing it, because they aren't held accountable. So this red record will put them on blast. Just like, and the other thing that they fight for, they want, now we have a job and we get a pink slip. When you get too many pink slips, we out of there. The police union is fighting for the police. When they get so many infractions after 3 years, expunge it, they get a restart. Clean that shit up, let's start all over again. Do some more shit. Just make sure you don't do too much in the 3 years. So this record, again, will put them on blast. I bet some of these cops go home like they're heroes to their little kids. Their kids need to know that they shot my son in the back. He ran in jail. Your daddy was a murderer. Your daddy's not a hero. Look up the red record and see all the shit that your daddy's been doing. That's what this red record is about. Let their children look up and see, Dad, why are they calling you a murderer? Dad, why did you have to shoot him in the back? They got to go home to their kids and see their kids get up in the morning, kiss them, go to work, and murder somebody else. These kids think their dad, oh, my dad is a cop, he's a hero. No, your dad is not. Look up the red record and see what your daddy is doing. Back shooting, falsifying records, lying, pushing old people on the ground till their heads burst in blood, running over people's kids, sniping people's children, killing 14-year-olds for tagging. This is what your daddy is doing. Look up the red record. It's not so much to hold in the accountability. That's what this is about, and I'm glad you're doing it. Thank you.
There are no people among us who tell the truth greater than the families most impacted by these murderous police. So thank you, Mr. Quinnis, and I want to acknowledge Grishario's mother, Sister Kat Walker. We're so grateful that you could be here with us. At this time, we're going to turn now to one of our colleagues, Michelle Dumont, who is with White People for Black Lives. You're going to see Michelle on Zoom, so let's hope that this works. Pray that this works. We see you, Michelle. The chalk lady is here. Hey, Michelle. Michelle is going to talk with you a little bit about our methodology, because again, it's really important for us that Any data that we present is rigorously researched and well-sourced by trained researchers and those most impacted and have expertise to talk about their lives. So Michelle's going to say a little bit about the methodology. Let's turn our attention.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. I'm so honored to be here. I can hardly express how honored I feel. Not only to have participated in this research, but to be among such a wonderful group and to feel that I am part of a tradition. This Red Record is just amazing. I'm going to talk about the research that is going to be presented on the website, and it's really kind of in two parts. One is the names of the police. The other is the names of the victims. So I'm going to talk about the police names first. The task at first was to get the names of the LA County officers involved in the murders of people over the term of Jackie Lacey's being DA, which is 2013 to the present. It's very difficult to obtain the names of these officers. For one thing, the Sheriff's Department, which is involved in a lot of these killings, and all the local cities like Torrance, Gardena, that the Sheriff's Department assists in the investigation of officers involved in killings, never releases the names of the officers. The LAPD sometimes does release their names in their use of force reports on their website, but it's not all cases, and so it's quite limited. What we found was that the main source of the names of the officers is letters that the DA is required to write and send to the departments of the officers involved in shootings and I'll talk more about this later, in what we call in custody deaths. And these letters state why these officers will not be prosecuted. Unfortunately, these letters are not produced until years after the police killing. The DA has a long-standing agreement with all of the county police departments not to decide on prosecution of the officers until after the departments have completed their own internal investigations, which takes at least a year in most cases. And Lacey has not been required to make these letters public until 2016. So we only have these letters that have been produced from 2016 to the present, but that means the 2016 letters are probably 2014 killings or 2013 even. So we're quite a bit behind. We did discover another source though, and that was KPCC, and many of you may be familiar with their efforts to talk about police shootings. They have a website called Officer Involved. And they got research from the DA's office to get them to release letters from 2011 to 2015. But these were only for shootings because they were only interested in the police shootings. This document dump provided us with a really good start on many of the officers' names. And since, of course, 2016, we have the letters for the officer-involved shootings and the in-custody deaths. But this means that there's definitely a gap in the data that we have, the gap of the year 2015 for shootings, and that means probably shootings that took place in 2013, maybe 2014. And then there's no records of in-custody deaths, at least the Lacey records, before 2016. What this means is that we only have officers' names for 52% of the killings that have taken place. So that was kind of discouraging to know that we couldn't get the names of so many officers. But in the meantime, as I was talking to people about doing this, and researching the actual deaths of people were asking me, well, is my person's name on this? Or I know this person died. So I began to realize that there was a lot of other killings that weren't being included. So the task then became to fill out the names. And for me, it's really, as I think Tabitha said, a sacred duty to make sure that we have as many names as we can. So our list, as was mentioned, is 618 people from 2013. And this is very different from other listings, and maybe you saw the LA Times article a couple of weeks ago. We use multiple databases and consider multiple ways in which the police kill, not just the shootings. And we have documentation for every single death that is listed. Usually that includes more than one source, all of which are publicly available documents. So just looking at the LA Times report, the LA Times relies on coroner's reports. And that means they report actually all homicides in the whole of the county, but they do let you search just those ones that involve officers. But they rely on the coroner's report. So the coroner has to say, this is a homicide in order for them to list them. And then I'm not sure exactly how they figure out that it was an officer involved because they made a few mistakes. But the Times report has only 2% of cases that are not shootings. So just recently, we learned of and talked about a death of a man in Santa Monica. And this man, I discovered, was on the Times homicide report, but not as an officer-involved death. Even though the officer was investigated, Lacey produced a letter saying that she wasn't going to prosecute, and the only person who could have been responsible for the death was the officer. And the thing was that this case was eerily similar to that of George Floyd. So this validated even more that, we were missing people. And as we saw in the case of George Floyd, and many other people who are killed by officers using excessive force, Floyd's death was initially not going to be ruled a homicide by the coroner until his family had an independent autopsy done that clearly showed that the actions of the police did in fact cause his death. So we can't count on coroner's reports. And it is important to note that police officers are present at autopsies and have been known, people in this room know this, to tell the coroner what to put on the reports. They too are part of what Dr. Yusef Salaam of the Central Park Exonerated 5 calls the criminal system of injustice. They're all a part of it. There are many categories of cases that the police and the district attorney call these in-custody deaths. And it's kind of confusing because it's not just people who die in jails, but it's also anything really other than an officer-involved shooting. If someone dies as a result of being tased, like Michael Frederick Mears, after excessive force, like Alessa Thomas, pushed in front of a metro train, like Cesar Rodriguez, or beaten to death in a jail, like John Horton, that gets labeled an in-custody death. All of these deaths are investigated by the police departments themselves and reported to the district attorney. The district attorney has to decide whether or not to prosecute the officers involved. This category accounts for about 28% of our cases, and only 3 of those are listed in the LA Times homicide report, and only 2 are designated as officer-involved deaths. Additional deaths include murders by police who are pursuing a suspect, where then the non-police suspect is charged with the murder, even if the police are the actual killers, as in the case of the shooting of Mila Corrado, if you remember the Trader Joe's case. So if the DA investigates these cases, these in-custody cases, and determines the responsibility of officers, then I think we should consider these deaths at the hands of officers. If police had not acted as they did, these people would not be dead. In the case of those who die actually in jails, which is about 20% of our cases, clearly the officers are responsible for people in their custody, the vast majority of whom are awaiting trial and have not been convicted of anything, like Waukesha Wilson. Because these in-custody deaths are rarely ruled homicides by the coroner, they will not appear on the LA Times list. In addition, we sometimes do not discover them until years later, when the district attorney makes the decision not to prosecute the officers. We therefore feel that we have an undercount of these deaths because only a few of these are actually reported in the press, and sometimes even the numbers published, especially by the Sheriff's Department, are incorrect. And of course, the DA often produces the alleged years after the death. We know cases that have not been decided by the DA since that happened in the early 2000s. And quite recently, a few months ago, Lacey released a letter that was from an incident of death that happened in 2011. These cases also account for the vast majority of people whose names we have not yet been able to find. The Muckrock News did provide a large number of names in the Sheriff's Department download of documents, listing in-jail deaths from 2004 to 2016. But while this is most, it is certainly not all of the in-jail deaths, because we know that the various departments have their own in-jail deaths as well. There's another category of deaths that are not represented in the LA Times data. That is what we call vehicle deaths. When the police decide to chase a person in a car, these chases sometimes end up in an accident where someone is killed. Again, we believe that if the police had not chased the person, then that crash would not have occurred, no matter whether or not the police vehicle actually crashed into that person. These cases account for an actual pretty shocking 10% of our cases. We just got 7 new names for 2018 recently. Many times there's more than one person who dies in a crash like this. One of the most shocking is the case in which 2 children, 7 and 9 years old, who were pedestrians on the sidewalk, were killed in a crash caused by a sheriff's deputy who made a dangerous turn against a red light without the siren on. DA Lacey refused to bring charges against the deputy, even though she found that the deputy was at fault in causing the accident. We believe that we don't have all of these cases because this data is hard to come by. Sometimes we get articles. Our biggest source of these cases is a website called Fatal Encounters. And that website is a national database of officer-involved deaths. And their philosophy is that if an encounter with the police, someone dies, then it's more likely that that person would not have died had the police not gotten involved. The LA Times, this is very interesting, the LA Times homicide report does include one of these vehicle deaths, but it is only because I think the officer killed the person literally by running them over with his car. We also have an other category, which is deaths that do not fit into the general categories of in jail, tased, excessive force, vehicle, or gunshot. These are only 2% of our cases, but for example, there are 2 cases where officers took medicine, heart medicine in particular, away from people, and the people ended up dead as a result of not having access to their medicine. And even with gunshot cases, we have a difference with the LA Times count. Their count for the time period is some 348, and ours is 376. The gunshot cases account for 62% of our cases. The largest reason for the difference between the LA Times and our account is that we include what the police label, or even the coroner labels, as suicides. And these are cases where the police or SWAT teams fire into a building and then later discover that a person was dead or is dead inside the building. And we're not sure who determines that it's a genuine suicide. However, again, whether these people would have died, even of self-inflicted wounds, had the police not fired into the building, is a big question. We also include officers who kill off-duty. It's only a small percentage, but these officers are as dangerous as those who kill on duty. Most of these are shooting deaths, but 3 were deaths caused by one officer driving under the influence. So while we don't have all these names, the destruction that these officers have done is incredible, and it's heart-wrenching. And I hope we can, in fact, get more of these officers' names. But we honor the victims, and that's most important right now. Thank you.
Michelle, I want to make sure you hear our thunderous applause again. Everybody was singing. Thank you, Michelle. When I think about this deep work, I'm reminded of Chinua Achebe's quote, which I read. Until the lions have their own historians, the history of the hunt will always glorify the hunter. Not here. Those who have been hunted by the hunters, we lift up as family members, as people we love, as members of our communities who deserve our honor and reverence. And those who have done the hunting will no longer have enmity, because we refuse to stand by as they continue to murder us. So it's our honor to, we're going to pull up the database, Philip. We're going to switch screens here. We're going to, Michelle, you're still with us. We're going to show you a glimpse of the database here. Melina, what do you want to say about this?
Sure. So everyone can pull it up on their own. This website is prosecutekillercops.org. prosecutekillercops.org. We want to again acknowledge the spirit of Ida B. Wells, and we pray that this website honors that legacy, right? We have here at the top of the website 618 people whose bodies have been stolen at the hands of police. And the one here, this is actually not even accurate. It's not cops prosecuted. that as you search the names of the victims, most of the victims will have an entry in our parallel site called morethanahashtagla.org or more than a hashtag LA on Instagram. What we've tried to do, and the reason that we have separated them, they're not on the same site, is just we thought spiritually, we don't want our folks, even virtually, on the same site as the police officers who killed them, right? So we want Daniel Hernandez to have his own story, right? We don't want him to be tied up with Tony McBride, right? And so we've separated the two. We will tell Daniel's story separately, but we don't want to tie into her spiritual, right? We don't want to tie into her spiritual. So this is the more than a hashtag site, the side on which we tell the stories of our people. You want to click on one of the names? You want to do maybe, so we try to tell the life of So we're going to leave it with that and just open up the floor to first any families who are in the room who want to offer feedback or thoughts. Any thoughts, feedback? I want to thank you.
Hernandez.
Say his name.
Daniel Hernandez. Let's show you.
Other family members?
Well, again, how Karma and God stepped in. I know that so-called elite police department, that so-called elite squad that was pulling people over and putting their names in the gang database like they were gang members, but they weren't. They just exposed that. They just exposed that as well. But now this is the truth. What's going up on Red Record is the truth. And they always try to vilify what they. So I applaud you and I thank you.
I'd like to say thank y'all for putting this website together. Because like you just said, they stuff get big. They put their lives out about all our kids, all our family members, even lies about us. So now it's on another shoot now. That's where you can at. So thank y'all for this work and thank you for the ongoing work we know that keep this website even more fun in the future. So thank y'all.
What's moving, and I definitely appreciate that you kind of motivate us spiritually, and it really is, and be there for y'all.
I want to thank Black Lives for giving, when I asked God first at the beginning, through y'all, to give me the platform to speak about the office. My baby. God is in a resilient species, I say. He's giving y'all to rebuild what's being done. I thank God for giving y'all the power, the tools to rebuild these dirty stuff.
Any other family members want to say anything?
I just want to thank you guys, everyone that put this together, the researchers, the students that worked hard, finding opportunities. I mean, even just having to read Jackie Lacey's reports because the reports there's a lot of messed up stuff in there. And having to sit there and read, through everyone's story, and it has to be hard. I just want to thank you guys for putting it, putting a database out there. I mean, if there's making law for pedophiles, I don't see why there should be something like this.
Woo! That's right. That's right.
I'm pretty sure the majority of them, if not all of them, are still working in the same police department that they killed our kids. I'm not in their daily shuffles around to other departments, and I'm going to the communities, killing people in those communities. So this is something that everybody has access to, and everybody in this community can go and look up the officers in their departments and see, who they've killed and read their stories. And
hard to ensure that these narratives are not told. And you can see just by virtue of the data collection that we've engaged in, right, how there's an active agenda to obscure and to conceal and to, again, do dirt in the dark. But we know that we are powerful. And when we do this work ourselves to tell these really important stories about our loved ones, our community members, we again are doing righteous work, and it's work that will turn what is really a vicious, horrifying system into something that we abolish and replace with reimagined community safety. And so that is also a part of this call to continue in this struggle. This database is a tool for us to tell the truth and to call ourselves to action.
I also want to lift up the invisible person. Kim who's not here. Kim and Kara in one of our mental schools out in South Carolina. Thank you for being our idol. Thank you.
So you should know, thank you, Sister Jan, for mentioning that we have a whole community of Ivy Wells. There's no single one of us. We really first turn to our families who know the most, right, about your loved ones. And you saw, you heard me mention, for example, Dr. Kim McNair, who's a historian, but also a member of our research team. We allied with White People for Black Lives, and as part of that, Michelle Dumont and Kareem are both members of the research team. Emily is another member of our research team, another scientist, a person who studies cells. She applies what she knows as a researcher to this work, and I'm sure I'm forgetting a name, but it's not from the heart, it's from the head. But of course, we should also know that Melina Abdullah is the visionary behind this project, and I would be remiss. It's not about writing a bunch of papers for our own benefit. It's about telling the truth in solidarity with the people most impacted by the pain. And there's no one who does that better than you.
We're going to bring the kids in here to do
Yes.
that. As we close out, we want to also remind you that when we say that we're trained researchers, some of us have gone to school to research, some of us have not, right? And both experiences are important. Our research team remains open, especially as we try to calculate photos. Some of y'all be stalking people on Facebook, right? We need you to do that for a purpose, right? If you're the one who goes through people's Instagram photos, whatever, until they get started, this is the work for you. This is how you contribute to the movement. I see a hand. If you are interested in helping us, so I was sending my students actually some of these small police departments actually have photos of every one of their officers up in the lobby. Take a picture of a damn picture and send it to us so we can know what the murder of Kendrick and Dave looks like, right? We need everybody to be part of this community, part of this open research team. If you are interested in doing this work,
just want to leave you with these words from Zora Neale Hurston, because it doesn't take a degree to be a researcher. Zora Neale Hurston says that research is formalized curiosity. It is poking and prying with a purpose. So you are researchers. You have curiosity, and more importantly, you have righteous transform. So do join us in this process. Let's now close our time with Asada, which will be led by our youth vanguard.